The mother had given birth just 4 weeks earlier when her husband threw her out of the house in the middle of the night because the DNA results didn't match. But when the truth came out, everyone went silent at her words. If you only needed a reason to throw me out, then you just created one. A middle-aged man stared at the white envelope marked RoseGen Laboratories. He held it with both hands, thumbs resting against the flap, and gently flipped it open. Inside was a piece of paper, folded in half. He pulled it out, read it quickly, then collapsed into the chair as if something had been pulled out from inside him. On the paper, a bolded line read, "No biological relationship found between the alleged father's DNA, Nathan Beckett, and the child's DNA, Noah Beckett. Probability, 0.00%. He read it again. Didn't blink. An older woman stepped in from the hallway. Her silver hair was tied neatly back. She wore a grey turtleneck sweater. This was Veronica Beckett, Nathan's mother. She looked at her son, then down at the paper. "What is it, Nathan?" He didn't answer. Just placed the sheet on the table, stood up, and poured himself a full glass of water. His hands still trembled. A knock at the door. 3 sharp raps. No hesitation. The woman at the door stepped in without waiting for an invitation. Claire Monroe, 39, a former colleague and former lover of Nathan's. Short-cut blonde hair, carefully done makeup. She took off her scarf, hung her coat on the rack, and sat herself down across from the fireplace. Nathan glanced at her. "Why are you here?" Claire gave a faint smile. "Your mother called, said you needed someone to talk to." Veronica didn't turn around. She only said quietly, "I thought you might need a friend." The room grew thick with silence. Upstairs, there were footsteps and the short cry of a newborn. Emily, Nathan's wife, 32 years old, had given birth just 4 weeks ago. She was changing Noah's diaper in the bedroom. No one called her from downstairs, but the sound of soft footsteps began to echo up the staircase. Emily appeared at the top of the stairs. Her hair was neatly tied back. She wore a postpartum robe and cradled a sleeping Noah in her arms. Her face looked pale, with dark circles under her eyes. She paused when she saw Claire and Veronica sitting side by side, while Nathan stood with his back to the stairs. "Nathan!" she called softly. He turned around. Without a word, he picked up a piece of paper and held it out to her. "Read it." Emily slowly descended the stairs, worry in her eyes. She took the paper, glanced over it, her forehead tightening. "What is this? When did you do the test?" 3 weeks ago, Nathan replied. "My sample. The baby's. The results just came in today." Emily clutched Noah closer to her chest. "You suspected me. Why didn't you say anything?" Claire stood up, arms crossed. Veronica remained seated, her expression cold and unreadable. Nathan didn't answer his wife's question. He only said, "You need to leave the house." Emily seemed to lose her breath. "Now? In this snowstorm? The sooner the better. I can't keep living with someone who lies." "I didn't lie," she blurted out. "The lab could have made a mistake. Or something else might have happened. Don't do this, Nathan. Please." Veronica stood. "No one's calling the police, Emily. But if you don't leave on your own, we'll have to take steps." Emily looked at each of them in turn. Veronica avoided her gaze. Claire met her eyes, but said nothing. Nathan turned away, walking toward the fireplace. She stood there. No one replied. No one asked a question. Emily turned and went back upstairs. 10 minutes later, she came down carrying a small cloth bag with Noah bundled tightly in a fleece blanket. No one asked where she was going. No one offered to help. Nathan stood at the far end of the room. He didn't come forward, didn't step back. His hands stayed in his coat pockets. His face showed no anger, no sorrow. He just stood there, as if everything that had just happened was necessary. Claire bent down, slowly retying her shoelace with careful, deliberate movements, as if nothing were urgent. Veronica poured more tea and gently stirred her spoon in the porcelain cup. No one looked up. No one looked at Emily. Emily cradled Noah in her arms and walked toward the door. Her movements were slow, a little uneven. She hadn't fully healed from childbirth. She reached out, unlatched the lock, and gently pushed the heavy wooden door open. Cold wind rushed in instantly, flipping up the edge of the baby's swaddle. A fine swirl of snow blew straight into her face, making Noah fuss and squirm in discomfort. She turned her head for one last look. Her voice was hoarse, strained. "Nathan, if all you needed was a reason to throw me out, you just made one. But Noah, he's yours." Nathan didn't move, didn't blink, didn't look at the child in her arms. Veronica withdrew the spoon and set it down on the saucer. Claire stood, stretching as if she were about to leave. Emily waited a few seconds. Then she stepped outside. The door closed behind her. A sharp click sounded firm, without regret. No car, no one. No one came after her. No one called her name. Only the baby's cries remained, small, but cutting through the night, echoing into the sleeping town. And in that silence, secrets long thought buried began to surface, quietly, one layer at a time. Emily walked a little farther into the cold night before she had to stop. Her legs could no longer keep a steady rhythm. She leaned against a freezing brick wall along the roadside, her coat soaked through the back. Noah had started crying again, the sound thin and scattered, growing weaker by the minute. She fumbled in her bag, trying to find something to wrap him in, but her hands were stiff, barely functioning. Her palms burned with numbness, as if she'd plunged them into ice water. Emily tugged the last flannel scarf from around her neck and wrapped it around Noah, then looked up. Across the street, a small sign glowed faintly. Maple and Steam, Coffee and Lodging. The first floor was a cafe, its warm yellow light spilling through frosted windows. Upstairs, one window was still lit. Holding the baby tight, Emily crossed the street. The doorbell gave a soft jingle as she pushed it open. The smell of weak coffee and baked goods filled her nose. The cafe was nearly empty. Only one person was wiping down a table. She looked up. Dark-colored t-shirt, loosely curled hair, a face that sparked something familiar. Sophie Matthews, 33rd. An old college friend of Emily's. They had once been close, then lost touch for several years. Sophie froze for a moment, cloth still in hand. She stared at Emily from head to toe. Her hair was a mess. Her coat was soaked. She was holding a tiny newborn, wrapped in a thin blanket, curled in tight. "What happened?" Sophie asked, her voice low and clipped. Emily just looked at her. Her lips were cracked, her eyes red from the wind. She stood motionless for a few seconds, then suddenly bent forward, pressing her face to Noah's forehead, and began to cry. Not loud sobs, but a trembling rhythm, broken and choking, as if she had held it in for hours through stairwells, closed doors, biting wind, and snow. And now, seeing a familiar face, not prying, not judging, her strength finally gave way. Sophie didn't ask anything else. She stepped forward and placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "Come upstairs," she said gently. "There's a bed in my room. Come on." Emily said nothing, just nodded, still crying. But she walked. The small room upstairs sat just behind a narrow staircase, the old wooden floor creaking softly with every step. Inside, a desk lamp cast a warm yellow light across a dark-colored bedspread. Sophie grabbed a large towel and wrapped it around Emily's shoulders. "Take off the wet coat. Let me hold Noah for a bit." Emily hesitated, then passed the baby to Sophie. She sat down on the edge of the bed, trembling slightly, her hands braced against her thighs. Noah wasn't crying anymore. Sophie carried him around the room, gently patting his back. After a while, she laid him down on the sofa by the wall and covered him with another light blanket. "Are you cold?" Sophie asked, her eyes on the baby. Emily shook her head, just slightly. Silence. Then she spoke, her voice hoarse. "He wouldn't even let me get a word in." She swallowed hard, her shoulders rising slightly. "Even when I told him Noah was his son, he still wouldn't listen." Sophie said nothing. She just grabbed another blanket and draped it over Emily's legs. "I didn't do anything wrong," Emily said, not loudly, more like someone speaking to herself or to the space between them. "It's just, no one wants to check the facts." Sophie looked at her for a second, nodded slowly. "People who are ready to condemn you before they ask a single question. They don't deserve to hear your explanation." Emily stayed quiet. Her hands were clenched, her cheeks were wet, but this time there was no sound of crying. Just silent tears, leaking out like snow slowly melting into a sleeve. Sophie stood up. She didn't say anything more. She went to get a water kettle and set it on the small stove in the corner of the room. There was no need to ask if Emily was hungry. No need to ask where she had been. Emily had woken up when the sky outside the window was still pitch black, save for a faint streak of light cast by the stairwell lamp outside. Her head felt heavy as stone, her eyelids dry and sore from a restless sleep that had started at some uncertain hour. Last night wasn't the first night she hadn't slept, but it was the first night she didn't fight it. For countless nights since being cast out of the house she used to call home, she'd lain curled up in the dark, eyes wide open, chest tight, heart drained of words. She didn't cry. She didn't think anything clearly. Just a blurry sequence of images played over and over. Nathan's ice-cold face, his hand never once reaching out to stop her, the door closing like a silent sentence. Every night had become a battle against the silence. But this morning, when she heard Noah stir and begin to whimper softly in the crib beside the bed, Emily shot up as if by reflex. No more hesitation, no more paralysis. She didn't think much, only knew she had to do something, anything, besides sit there waiting for despair to creep back in. She changed his diaper with hands still cracked and dry, wiped his face with a cloth dampened the night before, then wrapped him snugly in a thin blanket. Once he quieted and his breathing evened out, Emily stood up, pulled on her robe, gathered her tangled hair into a loose knot at the nape of her neck, and carefully made her way down the old wooden stairs to the cafe. Downstairs, half the lights were already on, and the faint scent of morning coffee drifted through the air. The clinking of cups echoed from the kitchen. Sophie was opening the place. She turned her head when she saw Emily coming down, paused for a second, but said nothing. Emily didn't say a word either. She set Noah's crib near the espresso counter, then quietly went to the sink to wash dishes, restacked the pastries on the display shelves, and wiped down every table with a damp cloth. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for instructions. Everything she did came as naturally as if she belonged there, even though, in truth, she didn't. Sophie watched, but didn't stop her, and didn't thank her. She simply set an extra box of tissues at the corner of the counter, leaving more space for Emily to move around. From that day on, Emily woke before sunrise. No more hesitation like the first time. She moved with the quiet resolve of someone repaying a debt to life, bit by bit through the work of her hands. She brought Noah with her every morning, kept him close while she worked, caring for him without a single complaint. The regulars soon noticed a strange woman who showed up daily, always carrying a baby, never making conversation, just focused on the work. At first, they looked at her with surprise. Then came the whispering. A few nodded politely. Others whispered behind cupped hands, thinking Emily wouldn't notice. One grey afternoon, when the cafe was nearly empty, two middle-aged women sat by the window. One leaned slightly toward her friend, her voice just loud enough to carry past the counter. "I've seen her at Nathan Beckett's house. Now I know why she vanished." Emily heard it. Not a word missed her ears. But her hands didn't pause, still wiping the counter, still pouring water, still setting it gently on the table like nothing had happened. No rebuttal, no retreat, no glance back. Sophie stood nearby, pausing for a brief moment. She glanced over at Emily but said nothing. That night, after everyone had left the cafe, Sophie quietly placed a warm water bottle under the foot of Emily's bed, right where she usually rested her feet before sleeping. No note, no questions. Emily discovered it when she bent down to pick up a fallen towel. She didn't say thank you, but she touched the bottle gently and let her hand rest there for a moment. And when she climbed into bed, she didn't curl up tight like she had on the nights before. Outside, the snow kept falling, steady, cold, and thick. But in that small upstairs room, there was a kind of warmth that didn't come from the heater or the heavy quilt. It came from the quiet kindness of someone who had once known her, understood her, and didn't need an explanation to stay. And from that very warmth grew a version of Emily no one ever expected. The lights in maple and steam cast long, thin shadows across the tabletops. It was still snowing outside, but softer now. Emily was behind the counter, washing glasses. Her sleeves were rolled up, revealing a few fresh scratches from the edge of a metal tray the day before. Noah was asleep in a small crib near the fireplace. The warmth drifting out was just enough to keep him sleeping soundly. Customers were sparse in the evenings, mostly night shift workers, long-haul truckers, or a few middle-aged men with laptops and unsweetened coffee. In the corner by the window, Daniel Harper sat with an Americano. He looked to be in his early 30s, tall, slightly tousled dark brown hair, thin-rimmed glasses. He usually sat there, quiet, occasionally jotting something in a notebook or scrolling through the news on his screen. Daniel had noticed Emily from his very first week, not because of her looks, but because of her strange silence. She worked without mistakes, but never looked anyone in the eye. Never started a conversation, just nodded or shook her head. He once thought she might be new in town, but the way she handled the job so smoothly made that unlikely. One Tuesday night, when only 3 customers remained, a heavy-set man in a baseball cap, Rick, a regular, called out from his table, "Hey, Emily, which husband left you this time? Or is it another bastard baby?" The place went quiet. Emily straightened up, glass frozen midair in her hand. No one moved. Daniel set his cup down, stood, and walked straight over to Rick's table. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "I suggest you apologize." Rick gave a dry laugh. "Just messing around. No big deal. Joking about the dignity of a woman raising a child on her own has never been a joke." After a tense few seconds, Rick stood up and left. No apology, but he didn't come back. Daniel turned to Emily. "Are you okay?" She nodded. Still didn't speak. "Could I get a cup of tea? And if you've got a minute, maybe sit with me a bit." Emily looked over at Sophie. She gave a small nod. The first time they sat across from each other, Daniel didn't ask Emily a single question. He simply handed her a cup of tea and started telling a story about a case he once handled in Chicago. A single mother who won custody of her child after being falsely accused by her in-laws. Daniel fell silent for a moment, then looked at Emily, his voice lower. "You know, You remind me a lot of my sister back then. Same eyes. Same way of sitting quietly. Like if you spoke, everything might shatter. Emily lifted her head slightly, momentarily stunned. She stared into the cup in her hands, lips pressed together as if weighing something. After a while, her voice rose, soft but steady. I used to have a family, a husband, a newborn baby. Everything seemed fine, until the test results came. Daniel didn't interrupt. Emily went on, her voice unwavering, though it was clear she was holding something in. They said Noah wasn't his. My mother-in-law believed it. So did he. They didn't want to hear anything more from me. I was thrown out in the middle of a snowstorm with nothing but my child. She paused, took a deep breath. I don't know what's left of my story to tell. Just that I still know I didn't do anything wrong. Daniel nodded gently, his eyes never leaving her face. If you'd like, I can help take another look at everything. Not to take sides, just to find the truth. No grand gesture, no saving hand, just a simple sentence, like a small wooden hook catching the hand that had been slipping too long through the cold. That night, when Emily went back upstairs, Noah was still asleep. She sat at the edge of the bed, holding tight to the still warm cup of tea Daniel had left behind. She didn't smile, but the feeling that someone had finally listened, even just once, remained in her hands, as real as that white porcelain cup. And that was the first night, after so many weeks, that Emily didn't dream of the door closing. Maple and Steam was quieter than usual today. The cold had settled deep, snow piled thick at the entrance, and wind gusted through the seams of the glass doors. Emily stood behind the counter, drying a glass with a cloth, but her eyes never left the wall clock. Daniel walked in right at 9 o'clock. He gave Sophie a small nod before heading straight to the counter. Unlike usual, he wasn't carrying his briefcase, just a small notebook and his phone tucked into the pocket of a heavy coat. Same as always, he said, looking at Emily. And, if you're not too busy, I've got something I'd like to ask. Emily poured his tea without a word. When the last customer left, Sophie waved goodbye from the kitchen door, then went upstairs. Only the two of them remained. Daniel leaned in a little closer to the counter. His voice was lower, slower than usual. I keep thinking about what you told me. You said you were certain you never cheated. So I just don't understand how the test result came out that way. If there was a mistake, there's only one possibility left. Emily looked at him, caught off guard. But Daniel went on. Did you receive the results directly from the lab? She shook her head. Number I didn't sign for anything. My husband was the one who brought the results home. The envelope had already been opened. Daniel nodded slightly, his eyes sharpening. I've seen a few cases where the error came from how the sample was taken or processed. Not often, but enough that I don't dismiss it. Do you know which lab did the test? I think it was RoseGen, somewhere on the east side, I believe, Emily said, furrowing her brow. At the time, I was just staring at the result. I didn't really pay attention to the lab's name, but I do remember Nathan mentioning RoseGen once. The next morning, Daniel picked Emily up in his car. The cold had deepened. The sky was overcast, not a trace of sunlight. They were both bundled up. Noah had been dropped off with Sophie to watch over him. The RoseGen office was in a 2-story building, its front lined with dull grey glass. A sign at the entrance read, "No walk-ins without appointment." Daniel took out his attorney's ID and handed it to the receptionist. They waited nearly 20 minutes before being invited into the records office. A man in a light blue shirt stepped in and sat across from them. His voice was polite, but firm. I'm sorry, but due to confidentiality regulations, we can only release records to the official requester or someone with authorized consent. Daniel opened his briefcase and produced a signed authorization form from Emily. The man still shook his head. This record was flagged for deletion immediately after the results were sent out. The tracking code is no longer valid. I'm sorry. Daniel frowned. Who requested the deletion? The man avoided his eyes. According to the system logs, it was the sample submitter, Nathan Beckett. Emily clenched her hands. But I never signed anything. The blood sample was mine, and my child's. The man hesitated briefly. A moment later, he lowered his voice. Just between us, personally, I find that unusual. Samples are typically stored for a minimum of 6 months. This one was deleted after only 5 days. It looks like someone really wanted to erase the trail. The next morning, Daniel picked Emily up in his own car. The air was colder, the sky blanketed in grey clouds, not a sliver of sunlight in sight. Both wore heavy coats and scarves wrapped tightly around their necks. Noah had been left in Sophie's care while they were out. The RoseGen office was housed in a 2-story building with frosted glass. Quiet and discreet. A sign out front clearly read, "No walk-ins without appointment." Daniel handed his attorney card to the receptionist, along with a request to meet with the records department. After nearly 20 minutes of waiting, a male employee in a light blue shirt came to escort them to a meeting room. The man sat down across from them, his tone courteous but distant. "I'm sorry, but due to privacy policy, we can only release records to the person who requested the test or someone with valid legal authorization." Without missing a beat, Daniel pulled out the prepared authorization form from his briefcase and passed it across the table. The man took it, glanced at it for a few seconds, then shook his head. "I'm afraid I can't help. This test record was flagged for deletion immediately after the results were sent. The tracking code is no longer active in our system." Daniel frowned, his voice low but clear. "Who requested the file be deleted?" The man hesitated, glanced quickly toward the glass door, then answered softly, "According to the system, the request came from Nathan Beckett, the name listed on the test sample." Emily clenched her hands tightly on her lap. "But I never signed any papers. That blood sample was from me and my son." This time, the man looked at her a moment longer. There was a slight shift in his eyes, less emotion than calculation. At last, he lowered his voice. "Just between us, having a file erased after only 5 days is highly irregular. Normally, both the sample and the results are kept for at least 6 months, unless there's a clear legal reason. In this case, it looks like someone went out of their way to wipe every trace." On the way home, in the car, Emily leaned her head against the window, watching the heavy snowfall outside. "I remember now," she said softly. "While I was still in the hospital, the nurses took my blood twice again. They said the samples had clotted, but I was so tired that day, I didn't think anything of it." Daniel didn't respond. He kept his eyes on the road. But in his mind, scattered pieces were starting to come together. Back at the cafe, as Daniel helped Emily out of the car, she turned to him and said, "If I never betrayed anyone, then who turned everything upside down?" That question stayed with Daniel all night. He couldn't shake it, and for the first time, Emily had something to pursue, not survival, but the truth. The snow hadn't melted yet. The sky over Winterdale hung grey, thick with heavy clouds. The cold seeped up from the damp pavement, reaching even the palms of Emily's hands inside her gloves. Daniel pulled the car to a stop in front of a small house at the end of South Street. Its shingled roof was weathered, and a dried-up plant still hung from the porch, left there since summer. A metal plaque on the door read, "Marla Jensen, R.N., retired." They rang the bell. No one answered the first time. Daniel pressed it again, longer this time. Inside, there was a soft shuffle of footsteps, then silence. No one came to the door. Emily glanced at Daniel. He gave a nod, pulled out a business card, and slid it into the door frame before turning to leave. On their way back to the car, they circled around to the side path. Emily stopped short when she spotted a familiar SUV parked across the street in the hospital lot. Silver grey, with a license plate she knew all too well. Claire. The woman was sitting inside, head bowed, talking to someone. The car door was slightly ajar, and the person standing outside, it was none other than Marla Jensen, the retired nurse from Winterdale Hospital. Emily had seen her once in the postpartum unit. Her expression had been polite then, but cold and vacant. Daniel immediately stepped back into the shade of a nearby tree. Emily stood still, eyes fixed on the envelope Claire had just pulled from her coat pocket and handed through the car door. Marla took it quickly, slipped it inside her coat, eyes darting around nervously. Emily couldn't wait any longer. She strode across the lot. Daniel followed behind, too late to stop her. "Claire!" Claire looked up, slightly startled. The surprise in her eyes vanished almost instantly, replaced by her usual calm. "Oh, Emily." Claire stepped out of the car, closing the door behind her, and glanced at Marla, who was hastily retreating toward the building. "Long time no see." Emily walked straight up to her, voice tight with anger. "What are you doing here? And what are you meeting Nurse Marla for?" Claire tilted her head slightly, eyes flickering as if weighing her words. "Oh, still sharp as ever, I see. It's just a private conversation. Nothing that concerns you." Emily didn't back down. Her voice tightened. "I don't think so. You showing up around Nathan while Noah and I were still there, I can't think the best of you after that." Claire didn't respond right away. She adjusted her scarf, glanced at the corner of the envelope now sticking out of her coat pocket, then looked Emily in the eye. "I don't know what you think is going on, but it's not as simple as you believe. Everyone has their reasons for going back to where they once belonged." Daniel caught up then, but Claire barely glanced at him before turning away. She said nothing more. The air between them turned heavy. She got back in her car and drove off, never looking back. Emily stood still for a few seconds, then walked back to the car with Daniel. She exhaled and gave a slight shake of her head. Daniel started the engine and glanced at her. Who was that woman? Emily stared straight out the window. Her voice was hoarse. Claire. Nathan's ex. They used to be in love, then broke it off. After that, he met me. Claire moved to another city for a while, and now she's back. She paused, and it seems like she never really let go. Daniel gave a slight nod, his eyes thoughtful. She handed Marla something, an envelope. Emily nodded. I saw it clearly, and Marla looked scared. Daniel gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, his lips pressing into a line, eyes still locked in the direction the car had gone. A brief silence. Maybe none of this is a mistake. Maybe it's all been planned. On the drive back, the radio stayed off. Emily didn't say a word the entire way. But inside her, it wasn't quiet sorrow anymore. It was fire. A fire searching for a way out from the ashes. The next morning, Daniel sat in the corner of Maple and Steam, his eyes fixed on his laptop screen. Beside him was a thick file Sophie had brought over earlier that morning. Emily was still upstairs, putting Noah to sleep after a restless night. She had barely said a word since the encounter with Claire. Here's the personnel list for the OB/GYN department from the past 3 years, Sophie said, setting the file down, her voice steady. I got it through a contact in the admin office. Daniel nodded his thanks and quickly flipped through the pages. Marla Jensen's name came up, along with a small note. Internal transfer, September last year. No reason given. He marked the page, then pulled out his phone and went over his old notes. Emily had mentioned there were 2 times during her pregnancy when her blood was drawn, once after giving birth and once during a routine checkup. Both times it was Marla who handled the procedure, but Emily had never signed any authorization forms, and she never received the test results directly. Nathan was the one who brought the envelope home, already opened. That afternoon, Daniel and Emily returned to Winterdale Hospital. This time, they weren't looking for Marla. They asked to speak with Dr. Carson, the attending physician for Emily's delivery. Carson was a man in his early 50s, known for being both dedicated and discreet. His office was simple and orderly. The moment he saw Emily, he recognized her. "I remember that delivery clearly. No major complications. Baby Noah was underweight but stable." Daniel began, "We're reviewing the procedures around postnatal sample collection and testing. Do you know a nurse named Marla Jensen?" Carson nodded slowly, his expression tightening slightly. Marla was reassigned from the maternity ward due to some procedural violations. Not during Ms. Emily's case, but after an internal audit, we found that at least 1 sample had been sent out without proper authorization paperwork. I requested that she be moved to the records department. Daniel jotted that down quickly. Emily stayed silent, clearly trying to keep her composure. "Is it possible something similar happened with Emily's records?" Daniel asked. Carson didn't respond immediately. "I can't rule it out, but I recall her test results weren't processed by the hospital. They were handled by Rose Gen, a private lab." Emily froze. "I never sent a sample to Rose Gen. I just remember Marla drawing blood, and then Nathan said he was sending it out just to be safe. I didn't ask further." That evening, in the small room on the 2nd floor, Daniel spread the files out on the table. Emily sat across from him, her hands gently wrapped around a cup of tea. If Marla sent the sample on her own, that's a breach of protocol. Without written consent, any result could be considered invalid. Emily spoke slowly, almost afraid to hear her own voice. "And Nathan, do you think he knew?" Daniel shook his head. "He might have just been the go-between. It was Claire you saw with Marla the other day. Remember? She has reasons to want to wreck everything." Emily nodded. "Nathan once told me he received the results. He didn't send anything out himself. If that's true, it's possible Claire was behind the setup. And he was deceived, just like me." Daniel paused for a moment. "We need proof. If there's a way to show Marla submitted the sample using her own ID and there's contact between her and Claire, that could be the key." The next morning, Sophie brought back a bag of old mail from the post office. Among them was one unopened envelope addressed to Emily Carson at her and Nathan's former apartment. The sender, Rose Gen. Emily opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a sample submission confirmation, listing Nathan as the primary contact. The email address belonged to Nathan's father's law firm. Daniel frowned. He received the results. But if Claire was the one pushing to get the sample sent, then Nathan might have just been following instructions without ever questioning them. Emily looked at the paper. The original should have come by email, but it might have been deleted. Someone handed Nathan a printed copy, but if that printout had been altered, he could have had no idea. Claire worked at his father's law firm for a short time. If she ever had access to the email system, she could have replaced everything. Daniel folded the paper, his eyes dark and steady. "We need access to Rose Gen's internal systems. I know someone who used to work in their tech department. If we can recover the email logs and the original submission data, especially Marla's login ID and any forwarding addresses, we'll know who's really pulling the strings." That night, Emily held Noah in her arms, her hand gently smoothing the thin blanket draped over him. The soft glow of the bedside lamp lit half her face, lost in thought. The picture that once brought her pain was beginning to crack, not because of her, not even because of Nathan, but because of someone else, quietly plotting every move. She looked over at Daniel, who was going through the recovered emails from RoseGen's system. His eyes were focused, thoughtful, but calm. He made no promises. Didn't say he'd help her win everything back. But his presence, steady and silent, made her feel, for the first time, that she wasn't alone. "Claire didn't just take my reputation," Emily said softly. "She took the truth." Daniel looked up. "We're going to take it back." She didn't answer, but for the first time in months, Emily saw clearly what she wanted. Not revenge, clarity, not for Nathan, not for Claire, but for herself, and for Noah. Outside the window, the snow had stopped falling. A few final flakes clung to the glass, cold and fragile. But inside the room, something else had begun to thaw, the fog in Emily's heart. She pulled the blanket up around her son, her gaze steady, as if seeing tomorrow for the very first time. The evening at Maple and Steam was quieter than usual. Daniel sat alone at the last table near the kitchen, the screen of his laptop glowing with the RoseGen system access interface. He was using a private backdoor connection, courtesy of Marcus, a former IT colleague from the company. Emily came downstairs. Noah was still peacefully asleep upstairs. She sat across from Daniel and placed a cup of ginger tea in front of him. What did Marcus say? He managed to trace a temporary backup on a secondary server, but we've got less than 48 hours before the system wipes it permanently. Emily nodded slightly, eyes darting nervously. We need to act now. Daniel ran a search command. A stream of data popped up. One email had been sent from RoseGen to Nathan's address, along with a DNA result. Just a day later, a deletion request was issued from the account m.jensen@roseganlabs.com. Daniel leaned back. The deletion request didn't go through any upper department. It was done by an employee. Emily's voice was cold. Marla. They arranged to meet Marcus at another cafe in the city. Marcus brought his laptop, opened it, and showed a sequence of access logs. Here, the account tied to Marla downloaded a file named ADN Noah H. Beckett Zip, then forwarded it to claire.dowell@crawfordlawfirm.com. The email clearly says, handled as requested. Emily's lips parted, but no breath came out. Daniel kept his eyes on the screen. He didn't need to say anything. The pieces were falling into place more clearly than ever. Back at Maple and Steam, Emily searched through her old inbox. There was one email from Marla, scheduling a blood draw in a private room instead of the common lab area. Daniel cross-checked the time. It matched exactly when the sample was sent, and the email to Claire was composed. They took blood from me and the baby, but I never signed anything. Emily didn't look at Daniel as she spoke. Maybe from the very beginning. It was a setup. Daniel nodded. Now we just need a witness, someone to come forward and tell the truth. Emily sat quietly, writing again in her notebook. Timestamps, email addresses, account names. Then she said, "We're going to find Marla." But finding Marla wasn't easy. She had quit her job abruptly and moved away. Her personal information had been scrubbed from the system, and no one knew where she had gone. Daniel traced a money transfer sent by Claire and tracked it to a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. They went together, but Marla wouldn't come out. She only peeked through a gap in the curtain, then disappeared from view. Emily stood at the door for a long time, sighed, then pulled out pen and paper. She wrote, "I'm a mother. I'm not here to blame or punish anyone. I just need the truth, so my child doesn't grow up in the dark. If you ever made a mistake, if you were ever forced into something, I believe you know what it means to protect a child. Please, for Noah." When she got back to the car, Emily said nothing. Daniel didn't press her. Outside, the sky was grey and a little raw. But inside the car, her hands rested on each other, calm and steady. 3 days later, maple and steam. The cafe was quiet that afternoon. Just a few customers scattered across the tables. The door opened, and a middle-aged woman stepped in wearing a knit hat and a long beige coat. She hesitated, then walked straight to the counter. Emily recognized her immediately, Marla. She set down her cloth and stepped out quickly to meet her. Daniel had just come down from upstairs. Marla stood still for a few seconds, then spoke. "I read what you wrote. So, Noah doesn't grow up in the dark." That line kept me awake at night. Emily didn't say a word, but her eyes followed Marla's every move, as if afraid one wrong sentence would make her turn and leave. Marla sat down at a table in the corner. Daniel sat across from her. Emily pulled out a chair beside her and sat in silence. Marla began, her voice hoarse. "Claire came to me a few weeks before you gave birth. She brought an envelope. It wasn't just money. She knew about a mistake in my medical records from years ago. If I didn't cooperate, she said she'd expose everything." Emily's voice trembled as she asked softly, "You cooperated how?" Marla didn't dodge the question. "I was the one who took the blood samples from you and Noah. But I switched them. Then I accessed the system, erased the original file, and sent a forged one to Claire's email." Emily leaned back, as if something invisible had shoved her. Daniel looked Marla in the eye. "What about Nathan? Did he know?" Marla shook her head. "I'm not sure, but Veronica, his mother, she knew. She knew from early on. When I got scared, she told me, 'Just do your part. I'll make sure my son understands the rest.'" Emily's voice caught. Why? Why would she do that? Marla lowered her face. She told me, "My son has lost enough already. I won't let anything else hurt him, especially not from a woman he's only known for less than 2 years." Emily pressed her lips together, her hands clenched on her knees. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I love him. And I never betrayed him." Marla looked up, gently touching Emily's hand. "I know, and I'm sorry. I was wrong, but I don't want to stay silent anymore." Daniel looked at her steadily. "Are you willing to testify in court?" Marla nodded slowly. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I owe that truth to the child, and to the future that child will live in." 3 days after the meeting at Maple and Steam, the air inside the cafe felt heavier, quieter. Emily walked slowly down the stairs, holding Noah in her arms. Outside, the snow had eased up, but the wind still cut sharp and cold. Daniel sat at a table with a folder of prepared documents laid out in front of him. The court date had been set, less than 2 days away now. "Marla's still keeping her word, right?" Emily asked quietly, her eyes laced with worry. Daniel nodded. "She said she'll be there on time. The court needs her testimony in person." But everything changed the next morning. Daniel tried calling Marla. No answer. Emily texted her. No reply. They drove out to the address she'd been staying at, a small rental unit on the east side, but the door was locked, the place completely dark inside. The landlord said Marla had left the night before, dropped off the keys, and didn't leave any message. Emily's worry deepened. She turned to Daniel and said, "Claire knows. She knows Marla's going to testify." Daniel's expression grew darker, or worse. She knows Marla already has. That night, just before 11 p.m., Emily received a text from an unknown number. I'm sorry. I'm being watched. If they find out I contacted you, I won't be safe. But I'm being held at the old house on the edge of Winterdale. Claire is here. Don't come alone." Emily called Daniel immediately. He arrived within 10 minutes. Together, they contacted the police that same night. Within half an hour, a local patrol team was dispatched to the old house, an abandoned estate on the forest's edge, once owned by the Dowell family, where Claire had grown up. Marla was found locked in a room, exhausted but physically unharmed. She hadn't been beaten, but her phone had been taken, and she'd been completely isolated. Claire was arrested on the spot, caught trying to burn a stack of documents in the fireplace. Among them were bank statements, emails, and manipulated copies of lab results. The police confiscated everything. Outside the town courthouse, a small crowd had gathered. A few local reporters, some curious townsfolk, and a long line of people waited to enter the courtroom. Emily stood off to the side, wrapped tightly in a dark grey coat. Daniel walked beside her, documents already secured in his briefcase. Marla arrived shortly after, escorted by the police. She gave Emily a nod, a small wordless gesture, but enough for Emily to understand. Today, the truth would be spoken. The hearing began promptly at 9 a.m. The judge was a calm, middle-aged man. The courtroom atmosphere was quiet, restrained, no murmuring, no whispering, just the sound of the gavel and short, held breaths. Marla was called first. She stood at the witness stand, her hand gripping the edge of her coat. "My name is Marla Jensen. I was the nurse responsible for collecting blood samples at the Rosegen laboratory in November of last year. I admit that I switched the blood samples in the DNA test case for baby Noah Beckett under the request of a third party. That person was Claire McConnell. She threatened to expose previous medical misconduct of mine if I didn't comply." The courtroom fell silent. Emily didn't blink. Nathan, sitting across the room, leaned slightly forward. Tension was visible in his body, but he said nothing. Marla continued, "I was also advised by Mrs. Veronica Beckett, Nathan's mother, to stay quiet after she learned of the situation through Claire. She told me, 'My family needs honor, not scandal.'" Daniel submitted a folder of evidence, including audio recordings, letters, and a restored copy of the original test results, retrieved from Rosegen's internal system. The judge then called Claire to stand and respond. Claire lifted her chin, her eyes cold, though her voice trembled when the questioning began. "I just wanted to take back what once belonged to me. I was with Nathan before she ever came along. I didn't mean to hurt the baby. I just made a small adjustment so they'd be driven apart." A wave of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Nathan suddenly stood up, his voice sharp and raw for the first time. "You didn't just wreck Emily's life. You made me look like a fool for months. You made me doubt my own child. You destroyed a family, all because of your twisted selfishness." Claire's face turned pale. She opened her mouth to respond, but the judge struck his gavel firmly, calling the room to order. Emily didn't say a word the entire time. She only stood when asked, "Ms. Emily Ross, do you have any requests as the legal mother of Noah?" She lifted her head. "I have no requests except one. I ask the court to grant me full custody of my son. I don't need an apology from anyone, just the right to live in peace with my child, based on the truth." The judge read the verdict. "Based on the evidence, testimony, and confirmations from all parties involved, the court rules Noah Beckett is the lawful biological son of Mr. Nathan Beckett. However, due to exceptional circumstances and conduct that has significantly affected the welfare of the child, full custody is granted to the biological mother, Ms. Emily Ross." The courtroom fell completely silent. No applause, no smiles. Nathan stood up and turned to look at Emily. He seemed about to say something. His lips parted slightly. But Emily gently squeezed Daniel's hand and walked straight past Nathan without turning back. Her shoulders didn't tremble, and her steps were steady. In her eyes, there was no resentment, only the quiet resolve of someone who knows exactly where she's headed. Emily said nothing. She left the courthouse with Daniel and Sophie. Inside her, there was no anger left toward Nathan, only a deep and aching disappointment. The man she once trusted without question had, in the end, failed to believe in her when she needed him most. Outside, the sunlight finally pierced through the lingering fog, not harsh or glaring, just enough to melt the thin layer of frost clinging to the stairway railing. Late winter sunlight streamed through the window of the small third-floor apartment in the old building. Today, the room was no longer the solitary refuge of a mother and her child. It had become a meeting place for hearts once broken. The dining table had been pushed against the wall. Simple wooden chairs formed a circle, just big enough for 8 people to sit together. Sophie set down a plate of toast, and Daniel placed a pot of hot tea on the table. Emily looked around, a bit anxious, but when she met the expectant eyes of the other women in the room, she knew she couldn't keep silent forever. They were the first single mothers of Noah's Light, the support group Emily and Sophie created after the lawsuit. They came from all parts of town. Some were young, some older. A few had small children in tow. Every face showed the marks of life, dark circles under tired eyes, calloused hands, and gazes that no longer trusted easily. Emily rose, cupping her tea. She didn't read from a script or notes. She didn't need them. "I'm Emily Ross," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I was thrown out of my home on a night when the snow was coming down hard. My baby was only 3 weeks old." Every eye turned to her. It wasn't pity that drew them, but the fact that all of them had heard the story, just never from the woman who lived it. Emily recounted every detail, without adornment or avoidance. The DNA test envelope, Nathan's suspicious glance, the harsh slam of the door, the hours carrying Noah through the snow with no idea where they would end up, the second-floor room at Maple and Steam, the hot water bottle Sophie had quietly slipped under the bed. Daniel sat still. He knew the story, yet for the first time he heard Emily tell it in a strangely calm voice. No anger, no blame. She spoke as though she were gently dusting off a scar that had long since closed. "I used to think I was abandoned," Emily said, "but I wasn't. I was just looking for the right place to stop. And maybe, today, is part of that place." A short-haired woman began to cry. Someone quickly offered her a tissue. No one spoke for several minutes. The air in the room seemed to settle. Daniel pulled out a small paper package and handed it to Emily. Inside was a children's paperback book with a picture of a bear hugging a child on the cover. On the first page, bold text read, "For the children strong enough to keep their mother in this world." Emily held the book to her chest. She looked down at Noah, sleeping peacefully in the cradle beside the table. One tiny hand rested on the edge of the blanket, soft curls brushing his forehead. She smiled, whispering just loud enough for herself, "We stayed, didn't we, baby?" Outside, a thin layer of snow still clung to the doorstep, but the light in that room had melted a part of the long winter inside the hearts of those who remained. That evening, after everyone had gone, Emily and Sophie stayed behind to clean up. Daniel sat playing with Noah, leaving the 2 women to talk. Before he left, he turned back and placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "You gave people a reason to stay. That's not something everyone can do." Emily nodded. No need to say more. Inside, she knew the pain that once imprisoned her was no longer a wound. It was proof that she had made it through. 3 days after the gathering, Emily received a call from Nathan. His voice was low, tired, and brief. "Mom wants to see you." and Noah. She's fading fast. If you can, would you come? She was silent for a few seconds. Then, for herself and for Noah, she said yes. The old house appeared before her, not much different from that snowy night years ago. But there was no snow now. And this time, Emily wasn't trembling. She carried Noah inside. Veronica lay on the bed, thin and frail, her hands marked with age spots, her eyes dull and clouded. She reached out weakly. Emily took her hand without a word. "I was wrong," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope my son knows I was wrong." Emily simply nodded. Forgiveness didn't need to be spoken, and she knew she had passed through the darkest part. On the way out, Nathan stood by the door, hands in his pockets. He didn't look her in the eye, just asked quietly, "Are you happy?" Emily didn't hesitate. "For the first time in my life." She turned her back, carrying her child as she walked away. Her heart felt light, because this time she wasn't running away. She was walking away from a closed chapter. On a late spring morning, the park by the lake quietly dressed itself in a gentle shade of green. Soft sunlight filtered through the trees, which were in the midst of changing their leaves. The grassy carpet was sprinkled with fallen cherry blossom petals, like snowflakes scattered across the ground. Emily sat on the picnic blanket, her eyes following Noah's every playful step, his face glowing as if untouched by any shadow. Familiar footsteps echoed behind her. Without turning around, she knew it was Daniel. He appeared with a small red bicycle in hand, holding a simple white ribbon tied to it. Noah turned around, shouting, "Daddy Dan!" His little legs carried him running into Daniel's arms, eyes shining bright with joy. Emily stood up and smiled. Daniel bent down to ruffle Noah's hair, then looked up at her. "He said he wants to learn how to ride like the other kids. Do you think it's time?" Emily nodded, her gaze softening. If he's ready, then it's the right time. The whole midday passed slowly, filled with laughter and sunlight. On the grass lay bread, fruit, and orange juice. Daniel ran alongside as Noah wobbled on his bike. Every small fall was caught by Daniel's steady hand, and every time Noah got back up, his laughter rang out even louder. Emily watched them from a distance. She didn't think about the past anymore. She no longer forced herself to explain what had happened. Names like Claire, Veronica, even Nathan, once sharp wounds, were now just faded streaks behind her. She had chosen to let go, not to forget, but to live on. Forgiveness didn't come in a day, nor was it because anyone deserved it. Emily forgave Nathan, not because he apologized, but because she understood Noah needed to grow up, surrounded by generosity. On those brief weekends, she let Noah see his father, still watching from afar. Every time she saw her son return with peaceful eyes, she knew she had made the right choice. With her former mother-in-law, Veronica, it was the same. A woman who had once been an important part of her life, then turned her back with such ease. But now, when all the wounds were clear and laid bare, Emily felt only lightness. No pity, no anger, just a quiet sadness that had settled. Life doesn't go back to the way it was, but it goes on. And Emily, for the first time after long, cold winters, felt like she was truly living. When Noah grew tired, Daniel gently lifted the boy into his arms. Emily quietly tidied up, then sat down beside him. Daniel was reading a story to Noah, his voice steady and warm. Emily laid her hand over Daniel's. No more trembling, no more fear. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think I was the one who'd been cast aside. But it turns out I was just on my way to finding the right home." Daniel said nothing. He squeezed her hand lightly, then bowed his head to rest gently against her hair. A silent answer. The gesture was simple, but full of assurance. Noah had dozed off, his head resting on Daniel's chest, his hand still holding the corner of the half-read book. The breeze drifted by, light as a blessing. Above them, a cloud slowly floated across the blue sky. No storms anymore? Just a gentle morning, warm enough for 3 people to sit quietly together, needing no more words, because they had found each other, just in time and in the right place. We have just walked alongside Emily's journey, a woman who rose from brokenness, not by magic, but through courage and the unconditional love she holds for her child. This story is not just about truths unveiled, but about how each of us can step through darkness if we have enough patience to seek the light, whether it's a small spark of kindness, compassion, or understanding. What do you think about Emily's choice to forgive? If you were in her situation, would you confront it head-on or let it go? Have you ever faced something that forced you to choose between holding on to the hurt or moving forward? I always hope that the stories shared on this channel help you feel accompanied and heard, just like Emily had Daniel and Sophie by her side. If today has been a tough day, give yourself permission to rest for a moment. You're still doing well, and if this story touched you in some way, don't hesitate to share your thoughts. I read and truly appreciate every message. Thank you for staying until the end of this journey. I'll see you again in another story, where we'll continue walking forward together